In a quiet restaurant, a billionaire named Enzo Theo sat in the shadows, broken and lonely. When he whispered to a waitress, "Please pretend for me," he never knew that one small kiss would change his life forever. This is not just a love story. It's a journey of two lost souls who find healing, passion, and a love strong enough to melt even the coldest heart. Stay with us, because what begins as a game of pretend soon turns into the most beautiful reality. Enzo Theo was a man the world thought had it all. At 37, he was the owner of empires, a name whispered in boardrooms with admiration and envy. People imagined his life was filled with celebration, laughter, and endless company. But inside, Enzo carried a silence so heavy that even the sound of applause felt empty. That night, he chose the quietest Italian restaurant on the edge of town. He didn't want glittering chandeliers or grand music. He wanted to disappear. Slipping into a corner seat, half hidden by shadows, he ordered a glass of red wine. The glass sat untouched for minutes because his mind was lost in memories of betrayals. Friends who pretended loyalty but only cared for his wealth. Women who claimed love but left when his heart wanted more than luxury. The laughter of other guests filled the air. Families sharing pasta, couples holding hands, young lovers whispering secrets. Enzo watched them, but he was only an observer of a world that no longer felt reachable to him. His wealth had built walls so high that no one dared to climb them. He wasn't Enzo the man anymore. He was Mr. Theo, the billionaire. Then she appeared, Valentina. She moved across the restaurant carrying plates, her steps quick yet graceful. There was no polished glamour about her. She was simple, real, with brown hair tucked loosely behind her ears and a smile that was kind, not forced. That smile wasn't for tips or praise. It was the natural kindness of someone who had learned to endure life's weight, yet still shine. Enzo noticed how she bent down to talk to an elderly couple, how she laughed softly when a child spilled juice, how her eyes sparkled even when tiredness pulled at her shoulders. She was unlike the polished women he knew, those who wore diamonds to impress him. Valentina wore humility, and strangely, it glowed brighter than any gem. Something stirred inside Enzo, a curiosity, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He straightened in his seat, his heart thudding as though he were a boy again. Why her? Why tonight? He didn't know, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. As Valentina approached his table, Enzo's breath caught. He was a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals without a blink, but now, in front of a waitress with tired eyes, he felt nervous. Nervous, because for the first time in years, someone was about to look at him without knowing his name, his bank balance, or his power. And when her soft voice broke the silence, "Good evening, sir. Can I get you anything else?" It felt like music to a heart that had forgotten how to listen. Enzo nodded slowly, studying her face, searching for something he couldn't name. The billionaire in the corner was no longer untouchable, no longer shielded by walls. He was just a man, aching for something real. That night, as he watched Valentina walk away with his order, Enzo realized a truth that made his chest ache. Sometimes the most powerful moment in a billionaire's life doesn't come from success, but from noticing a stranger who unknowingly begins to change everything. And deep inside, a thought whispered to him like a secret. Maybe tonight won't be another lonely night after all. Valentina walked toward Enzo's table with the same gentle grace she carried all evening. In her heart, she was tired. Her shift had been long, her feet ached from endless steps, and tomorrow she would have to work another double just to pay her bills. Yet, as always, she forced her smile, the kind that made strangers feel seen. When she stopped by his corner, Enzo lifted his gaze. For a brief moment, their eyes locked. She saw loneliness hiding behind his strong features. He saw warmth hidden behind her tired smile. Something passed between them, unspoken, fragile, yet powerful enough to make time feel slower. Enzo hesitated. His throat tightened. He wanted to say something ordinary, Just water, please, or another glass of wine. But his heart, starved of connection, betrayed him. Leaning forward, his voice dropped low, almost trembling. Please pretend for me tonight. Valentina blinked, stunned. Her hand tightened on the notepad she carried. Pretend? What did he mean? Her first thought was that he was one of those rich men who played cruel games with waitresses. She almost stepped back, almost forced herself to walk away. But something in his eyes stopped her. There was no arrogance there, no pride, only a man begging for something she couldn't yet understand. His voice wasn't commanding, it was pleading. Confused, she asked softly, "Pretend what?" Enzo's lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "Pretend that you're here with me, just for a little while, like we belong together." Her breath caught. No one had ever asked her for something so strange, so vulnerable. She wanted to laugh it off, to tell him she wasn't part of whatever story he was living. But as she looked at him, really looked, her heart trembled. She saw loneliness deeper than her own. Why did she care? Why did she feel the urge to sit down? She didn't know. But Valentina had always been someone who felt too much, who carried the burdens of strangers as if they were her own. Something about him. It pulled at her. Slowly, almost against her will, she nodded. "All right, just for a little while." Enzo's chest loosened with relief. It wasn't a business deal, it wasn't a contract. Yet it felt more important than anything he had ever signed. He gestured gently to the chair across from him, and Valentina, trembling with curiosity and fear, slid into the seat. The restaurant around them faded. The noise, the laughter, the clinking glasses, it all blurred into the background. For Enzo, the moment was fragile magic. For Valentina, it was dangerous curiosity. "Why me?" she whispered, searching his face. Enzo leaned closer, his gaze steady. "Because when you smiled at me, I didn't feel invisible anymore." Her heart skipped. She wanted to tell herself this was just a game, just a passing moment she'd forget. But the weight in his voice, the honesty in his eyes, it was too real. And as silence stretched between them, something unexpected happened. For the first time in years, Enzo felt seen. And for the first time in her life, Valentina felt chosen. Neither of them knew it then, but that simple whisper, "Please pretend for me," was not the beginning of a game. It was the first spark of a love that would turn their worlds upside down. The chair felt strange beneath Valentina as she sat across from Enzo. She wasn't supposed to be here. Waitresses didn't sit with customers, especially not mysterious men who whispered unusual requests. Yet here she was, her apron tied tight, her hands nervously folded in her lap. Enzo studied her face as though it were the first piece of beauty he had ever seen. Not the beauty of wealth or glamour, but the beauty of truth. Her hair fell naturally against her shoulders, her eyes shone even through exhaustion, and her voice, soft, untrained, unpretentious, wrapped around him like warmth on a cold night. At first, their talk was simple. He asked about her shift, and she told him it had been long. He asked if she liked working there, and she admitted it was just a way to pay bills until she could chase her real dream, owning a bakery. The word bakery made Enzo smile. Something so small, so ordinary, yet spoken with such passion. He leaned closer, wanting to hear more. Valentina's eyes lit as she spoke of the smell of fresh bread, the sweetness of pastries, the joy of creating something with her hands. For a moment, her tiredness vanished and she became radiant. Enzo had met women who spoke of yachts, diamonds, and fame. None of them stirred him. But here was a woman who dreamed of bread and flour, and strangely, that felt more precious than gold. Time slipped by unnoticed. Valentina forgot her shift, forgot her aching feet. Enzo forgot his loneliness, forgot the walls he had built around his heart. The pretend game had become something else, something frighteningly real. And then it happened. The silence between them grew heavy, charged with an unspoken pull neither could deny. Valentina's breath caught as Enzo leaned forward. His eyes searched hers, asking a question without words. Her lips parted in surprise, but she didn't pull away. His lips brushed hers, softly, hesitantly, like a man terrified to break something fragile. The world stilled. The clatter of dishes, the chatter of guests, the hum of life, all faded. There was only the taste of something forbidden yet inevitable. Valentina trembled, her heart racing in a way it never had. She should have stopped it. She should have reminded herself this was only pretend. But the kiss felt different. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't power. It was need. A need as raw and aching as her own. When he pulled back, his eyes shone with emotions he could no longer hide. "I'm sorry," he whispered, though his voice was thick with truth. That wasn't part of pretending. Valentina touched her lips, still tingling, her chest rising fast. Her voice cracked as she answered, "No, it wasn't." They both knew the truth. Something had changed. A line had been crossed, one that could never be undone. What began as a stranger's request had become the start of something far greater, something neither of them had dared to hope for. And as Valentina looked into Enzo's eyes, her heart whispered the question she couldn't stop herself from asking. "This isn't pretend anymore, is it?" Enzo couldn't speak, but in that silence, in the trembling breath he released, she already knew the answer. When Valentina walked away from the table that night, her steps were unsteady. The kiss lingered on her lips, and her heart thundered with every breath. She had served countless customers before, but none had unsettled her world like this man. Who was he really? Why did his eyes look so haunted? And why, against all reason, did she feel like her heart belonged to him already? Back in his corner, Enzo sat motionless, staring at the glass of untouched wine. His mind was at war. He had built his empire by never letting emotions guide him, yet a single kiss with a waitress had torn down walls that years of betrayal had forced him to build. He had sworn never to trust again, never to hand his heart to anyone who could break it. And yet, Valentina's honesty, her simplicity, had shaken him. But fear crept in quickly. What if she found out who he really was? Enzo Theo, billionaire, owner of companies that touched every corner of the city. Would she still look at him with the same kindness, or would her gaze change, like so many before her, to greed and calculation? He couldn't bear the thought of her seeing him as a walking fortune instead of a man desperate for love. Valentina, too, carried her fears. As she cleared another table, her thoughts kept drifting back to him. The kiss had felt real, too real. But she reminded herself, she was just a waitress. Men like him, even ordinary ones, didn't choose women like her. She had been hurt before, left behind by someone who said he loved her but couldn't handle her dreams or her struggles. She couldn't let herself believe in a fantasy again. Later that night, when the restaurant emptied and the soft glow of lamps replaced the noisy rush of dinner hours, Enzo remained at his table. Valentina hesitated, then walked over. "You're still here," she said softly, her voice caught between curiosity and caution. Enzo looked up, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I didn't want to leave yet." Their silence stretched. Valentina's chest tightened, torn between wanting to ask who he really was and wanting to protect herself from an answer that might shatter this fragile connection. Finally, she whispered, "Whatever this is, it can't be real. People like you don't sit with people like me." Enzo's jaw tightened. He wanted to tell her everything, how money hadn't bought him love, how success had left him empty, how her simple presence had given him more peace than all the luxury in the world. But his fears stopped him. If she knew, would she walk away? Or worse, would she stay for the wrong reasons? So he only said, "Maybe you're wrong." Valentina searched his face, her heart aching with confusion. She wanted to believe him, but the voice of caution whispered louder. Don't fall, don't trust, don't dream. When he finally stood to leave, the air between them was heavy. Enzo longed to touch her hand, to promise her this wasn't pretend. Valentina longed to call him back, to ask what was in his heart. But fear chained them both. That night, as Valentina watched him disappear through the restaurant doors, she pressed her fingers to her lips and whispered to herself, "Why does it hurt so much to let a stranger go?" And miles away, sitting in the back of his sleek black car, Enzo whispered into the silence, "Please, don't let this be the end." Neither of them knew it yet, but those walls and fears would be tested soon, and love had already planted itself too deeply to be ignored. Days passed, but Enzo couldn't forget her. He had met world leaders, signed contracts worth millions, and sat across from the most glamorous women. Yet none of them stayed in his mind the way Valentina did. Her laughter replayed in his head like a melody he couldn't escape, and the memory of her lips against his haunted his nights. So he returned. Again and again. Every evening, the quiet Italian restaurant became his haven, and every evening, Valentina's chest tightened when she saw him at the same corner table. He never demanded her attention, like entitled guests often did. Instead, he waited patiently, his gaze softening only when she approached. At first, she thought it was coincidence. Then, when he came 3 nights in a row, she realized he was coming for her. One evening, after the rush slowed and the restaurant quieted, Enzo spoke. "You must think I'm strange," he said, his voice gentle. Valentina tilted her head. "Strange, maybe a little, but not in a bad way." Enzo chuckled softly, the sound surprising even him. "I don't want to pretend anymore. Not with you." Her heart skipped. His words were dangerous, carrying a weight she wasn't ready to hold. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "I know enough," he replied, his eyes burning into hers. "I know that when you talk about baking, your whole face lights up. I know you work harder than anyone here, yet you still find kindness for strangers. And I know that when I'm near you, the silence in my life finally breaks." Valentina's chest rose and fell quickly. She wanted to protest, to remind him that she was just a waitress, that men like him didn't fall for women like her. But deep down, a part of her, the part that had dreamed quietly of love while struggling alone, longed to believe him. That night, when the restaurant closed, Valentina found him waiting outside. The air was cool, the street quiet, and Enzo stood beneath a soft golden streetlight, not as a billionaire, but as a man waiting for someone who mattered. "Why are you still here?" she asked, clutching her jacket. His answer was simple. "Because I don't want to let you go." Her heart swelled, trembling with fear and hope all at once. She stepped closer, her voice shaking. "This was supposed to be pretend." Enzo's gaze softened. "And now it's the truest thing I've ever felt." For a long moment they stood in silence, the world around them forgotten. Then, gently, Enzo reached for her hand. Valentina hesitated, her past whispering warnings. But his touch was warm, steady, patient. Slowly, she let her fingers slip into his, and in that simple gesture, walls that had stood for years began to crumble. As they walked together under the quiet night sky, Valentina realized something terrifying and beautiful. She was falling for him. Not for the mysterious customer, not for the wealthy man she didn't yet know fully, but for the soul that had whispered, "Please, pretend for me." And Enzo, holding her hand like it was the only treasure he had ever wanted, finally understood. His life of riches had been empty because he had never had this. Something real, something pure. That night, the line between pretending and truth vanished. What began as a fragile game had turned into the beginning of love. Months passed, and what had begun as one whispered request grew into a love neither of them could have imagined. Enzo no longer hid behind shadows in quiet corners. He laughed freely now, not the hollow laugh of business dinners, but the kind that reached his soul. the kind Valentina's presence drew out of him. Valentina, once afraid of dreaming too big, found herself daring to believe in her own worth. She still wore her apron, still worked long hours, but she was no longer carrying her burdens alone. Enzo stood beside her, not as the billionaire everyone feared or envied, but as the man who cherished her heart above all else. One crisp evening, Enzo brought her to a small storefront tucked between two bookshops. Its windows were dusty, its sign faded, but its bones were strong. He handed her a set of keys, his expression soft. Valentina blinked in confusion. "What is this?" He smiled. "It's yours, if you want it. Your bakery. Not because of me, but because I believe in you. I'll be here as your partner, not your rescuer." Tears blurred her vision. No one had ever believed in her dreams this way, not even herself. Slowly, she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The empty space smelled of possibility. She imagined the scent of bread rising, the laughter of customers, the warmth of creating something with her hands. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just imagine, she knew it would happen. Enzo walked in behind her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. His lips brushed her ear as he whispered, "I don't need grand mansions or endless riches. I need this. I need you." Valentina turned in his arms, her tears slipping free. She cupped his face with trembling hands and whispered back, "And I don't need a fairy tale prince. I just need the man who once asked me to pretend, and then showed me what real love feels like." Their lips met in a kiss that wasn't fragile anymore, but full of promise. A kiss of two souls who had finally found home in each other. Months later, the bakery opened. Customers came not just for the pastries, but for the warmth that filled the little shop. Enzo often stood behind the counter, not as the billionaire Enzo Theo, but as Valentina's partner, happily dusted with flour. And she, glowing with pride, would often laugh and tell him, "You look better in an apron than a suit." Their story spread quietly, not through headlines, not through fame, but through hearts that witnessed it. People whispered about the billionaire who chose a waitress, about the love that defied class, wealth, and judgment. And the lesson was clear. Love doesn't measure by bank accounts or social labels. It isn't about wealth or status. It's about two hearts choosing each other despite the walls society builds. Enzo and Valentina proved that kindness, patience, and faith can bridge worlds apart. In a society too quick to judge by appearances and possessions, their love stood as a gentle reminder. Sometimes the richest man is the one who learns to value love over luxury. As they stood hand in hand one evening, watching the sun dip beyond the horizon, Enzo whispered, "All I wanted was someone to pretend with. Instead, I found someone to live for." And Valentina, resting her head against his shoulder, smiled with tears of joy. "And I found the man who taught me that dreams and love are worth believing in." The world around them faded, but in their little corner of forever, they knew one truth. They had discovered something priceless. Not pretend, not fleeting, but real. Love that healed, love that stayed, love that taught society what truly matters.